Joe Exotic's cohorts know who the good guys are in the whole Tiger King saga. It's the PETA lady who filed the lawsuits that brought the Tiger King and his ilk and the whole exotic animal wildlife business to its knees. I talked to PETA's Brittany Peet next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's show, Tiger King Season 2 is out. Are you binging? The highlight is when one of Joe Exotic's cohorts, Tim Stark, is asked about the future of the exotic animal industry. And Stark says it's over. And why? One word: PETA. PETA's lawsuits using the Endangered Species Act is responsible for the criminal enforcement and judgments that have impacted not just Joe Exotic, but all his associates who've been involved in the exotic animal industry. And the woman who filed the lawsuits, Brittany Peet, head of PETA's CALE department, CALE, for Captured Animal Legal Enforcement. You won't hear much about them, only in passing, but the lawsuits are the driver of the story. Peet talks about that here, as well as updates us on the characters Tim Stark, Jeff Lowe, Carol Baskin, and her husband Howard, and of course, Joe Exotic. I also asked her to match up the things she told us earlier this year in our PETA podcast about the exciting convoy to seize the animals, and she updates us on the animals themselves, most all of whom are in sanctuaries and doing better than Joe Exotic. My conversation with PETA's Brittany Peet on the PETA Podcast.
When we did the rescue of 22 big cats from Tim Stark's Roadside Zoo Wildlife in Need, Tim Stark is one of the villains featured in this season of Tiger King. When we did that rescue, Tim Stark was on the run from the law. There was a warrant for his arrest. He'd been charged with contempt of court for concealing numerous exotic animals in a stiflingly hot, unventilated trailer in the woods on his property, attempting to conceal them from state authorities. We went in after state authorities had completed their confiscation. And we didn't know where Stark was. He was on the lam. And the really concerning part is that he's a trained sniper. And he'd repeatedly threatened throughout the years that no one would take his animals alive. And we knew that he had a large arsenal of guns. And so thankfully, the judge in our case ordered federal marshals to be present for the rescue. And in addition to those federal marshals, there were state police, local police. We rolled up with a convoy of dozens of vehicles, and the law enforcement stayed throughout the rescue. And you can see in Tiger King Season 2 what that convoy looked like.
I was watching last night and I said, my God, there's a convoy and there's the truck with the concealed animals. Was that it? That was, I guess, episode 4. Was that what you described in our PETA podcast update earlier this year?
Yeah, it was. I think the footage that they used of the convoy in Tiger King Season 2 was from the state of Indiana's confiscation. That was when Tim Stark was still on the property. He wasn't yet on the run. So ours was a little different. I think we actually had more law enforcement, because of the danger of simply not knowing where this dangerous man was. And another thing that people will see if they watch Tiger King Season 2, and most of these events unfold in episodes 4 and 5, is just how unhinged of a person Tim Stark is. He made numerous threats on camera in the film, including against PETA.
Yeah.
So that was a threat that we took really seriously, and we were going to do everything possible to make sure that we got all of those animals out alive, and that's just what we did.
So I was just kind of piecing together because I saw Tiger King 1, and now here are 5 episodes for season 2. And I remember after season 1, we did updates. We did one just this year. So tell us where we are now. Remind us where we are in the case with the main characters. We have Joe Exotic, we have Carol Baskin, we have the aforementioned Tim Stark, and we also have Jeff Lowe. I mean, those are kind of the 4 main characters that I see, if we can kind of funnel it down to those 4. So remind us where we are at the end of season 1 and through the updates, and now we have season 2, and people are going to be watching it. Joe Exotic, let's begin with him. He's still in prison.
Yeah, Joe Exotic is still in prison. His original sentence was 22 years. He has, since season 1, successfully petitioned to be resentenced. It's for a procedural reason relating to the way that his the sentence was laid down based on his charges. So we don't need to get into that, but he will be resentenced. That said, based on the sentencing guidelines, we don't see any reason that he will not still be in prison for a very, very long time, likely for the rest of his life.
One thing that gets me is that 22 years he was sentenced. There was a move to try to get him pardoned by the previous president, and that failed. It didn't happen. And it looked like it possibly major disappointment on the part of Joe Exotic. But he's thinking that he's not going to be there beyond can he appeal for, say, a parole at some point within the 22 years?
So that's certainly possible, but the more immediate issue is that Joe is apparently seeking a new trial. Another one of the bombshells that's revealed in Tiger King season 2 is that some of the witnesses in Joe's original trial, including Alan Glover, who was the original hitman that Joe hired to kill Carol, Jeff Lowe, Joe's former business partner, and James Garretson, who was an exotic animal exploiter himself turned FBI informant. Now they're all saying, well, Joe shouldn't be in prison for 22 years. And some of them are actually changing the positions that they took. And in fact, some of the testimony that they made in the first trial, subjecting them to potential perjury charges. The question is, were they lying then or are they lying now? What we know about these characters is that they are liars. This is in character with them. And another thing that we know is that one of the jurors in the trial said that really the most damning piece of evidence from them came right out of Joe's mouth. It was from a recorded phone call in which Joe discussed providing money to a hitman explicitly to kill Carol Baskin. So will he be granted a new trial? I think it's pretty unlikely. But one of the things that Tiger King 2 definitely shows us is that all of these characters are just as shady as ever.
Well, one of the things that gets me is that Joe Exotic wouldn't be in behind bars were it not for some of the legal maneuvering of PETA. If it weren't for the kind of lawsuits that PETA was able to bring forth, many of which were really for the first time using the Endangered Species Act. Tell us about that a little bit. And is that, when you talk about the 22 years, I know that he was convicted of hiring a hitman, but in the scheme of things, where do these crimes fall in terms of, attempted murder, with a hitman, that kind of conspiracy, plus all the animal endangerment issues that PETA brought forth against him through the Endangered Species Act?
So in addition to murder for hire, the United States also charged Joe with multiple counts of violating the Endangered Species Act and the Lacey Act. And he was ultimately convicted on 17 counts, including for shooting 5 tigers in the head to make space for tigers that he was being paid to board, as well as the trafficking activities that PETA knew that he was engaging in, and that PETA was the organization that went to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the evidence initially that sparked the wildlife crimes investigation. But PETA's Endangered Species Act litigation program has been groundbreaking. It started in 2017, I believe, with the first lawsuit against a roadside zoo in Florida called Dade City's Wild Things. And in that case, we argued that it violates the Endangered Species Act to separate baby tigers from their mothers and to use them in public encounters. And that premature maternal separation has to happen for these encounters to occur, because they can only occur for the first few months of the tiger's life. And in the wild, that tiger would stay with her mother for up to 2 years. And it's incredibly cruel for both the mother and the cub. That case, the owners of Dade City's Wild Things are just as wacky as the Tiger King villains in the Netflix series, and they pulled lots of vicious stunts throughout the litigation that resulted in PETA winning a default judgment in that case. So that was the first win that we had under our belt. We ended up rescuing 27 tigers total from Dade City's Wild Things as a result of that rescue. And it ended up being, you could say, it ended up being good for us. One of Dade City's Wild Things stunts in which they attempted to stash a number of tigers with Joe Exotic himself. And that led to us not only being able to rescue the 19 tigers that they shipped across the country to him, but also led us to being able to rescue 20 more tigers from Joe Exotic, along with 3 bears, 2 baboons, and 2 chimpanzees. So that led to a lot of really great stories for those animals who'd suffered so much.
Yeah, and so in the big picture, though, or the Endangered Species Act violations were no less than the attempted homicide in some ways. No,
the sentencing guidelines for murder for hire is significantly higher than that for Endangered Species Act violations. You can serve time in prison for ESA violations, and Joe is doing just that. But there is a chronic disparity in punishment enforcement across the board with law enforcement when it comes to animal crimes. But this was the first time that we've seen the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pursue criminal charges for this type of activity with captive tigers. So this really was a watershed moment. And it was one of the first moments that the exploiters and abusers in this industry, who had trafficked in big cats and abused them for so long, thinking that they were immune to prosecution or any type of consequences for this activity, it was the first time that they started to realize that they weren't immune. And between that and PETA's lawsuits, we've seen a huge deterrent effect occur. One of the main things that we've been able to do through our lawsuits and our advocacy is to take out the main breeders. So we're reducing the supply. We're also creating a deterrent effect because nobody wants to be next. Nobody wants to be the next roadside zoo on the other side of the V from PETA in a lawsuit. One of the great features of the Endangered Species Act is when you file a lawsuit against someone and you win, there's something that's called a fee shifting provision. So you can then go to the court with all of the expenses, including attorney's fees that you've incurred during a case. And so in the Dade City's Wild Things case, those defendants owe PETA now more than $400,000. Tim Stark owes PETA more than $750,000. So there are a lot of really great reasons why these animal exploiters don't want to be the next one on PETA's hit list. And so we've seen the big cat cub petting industry really plummet since we started filing these lawsuits. I think back in just a few years ago, there were more than 20 exhibitors at a time doing these types of cub petting events. And if you think about the number of cats that were involved, most of these places had at least 2 tigers or other big cats at any time, and they could only be used for 3 or 4 months. So there's this constant cycle of cats coming in and out. Well, now there are only 2 exhibitors left in the country that are doing big cat cub petting.
And that's all due to the fact that this, PETA's brought forth this idea that the Endangered Species Act is really a weapon that can defeat all of these people, all these perpetrators who would just fly in the face of the law.
That's absolutely right. And the best part, one of the best parts, is that it's not just PETA now. The U.S. Department of Justice has taken PETA's Endangered Species Act win against Tim Stark. In that case, we actually won the case. It wasn't just a default judgment. And in that case, it was about not just tigers, but tigers, lions, and tiger-lion hybrids. And that's a really important point because Jeff Lowe and Tim Stark, these guys had been saying after PETA started filing under the ESA, well, we're just going to start breeding hybrids then because they're not covered under the ESA. And so we established in this case, yes, they are. All of these big cats are. And so after that case, the U.S. Department of Justice filed an ESA lawsuit against Jeff Lowe using the blueprint that from PETA's lawsuits against both Dade City's Wild Things and Tim Stark, and explicitly relied on our lawsuit against Tim Stark and Wildlife in Need in their case. And that led to the confiscation of dozens of big cats from Jeff Lowe and all of the rest of his animals too. Jeff Lowe no longer has any wild or exotic animals. And it all goes back to that first case against Dade City's Wild Things. We tried out this legal theory, and now we've taken down the entire industry.
And it's all because of the use of existing animal rights law, and really flexing the muscle of the law that exists. So when people look at the first episodes of season 2 that are now out, and they see Joe Exotic, and they see that people are trying to change their story about the murder for hire, while that is significant, he really should be in jail for what he did to the animals.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
There are so many crimes that Joe committed throughout his life against animals that he was never charged for and never will be charged for. Joe absolutely deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison, and that may very well be what happens. I think one of my favorite parts from Tiger King season 2 is when one of the directors of the series asks Tim Stark what he thinks is the future of the exotic animal industry. And Tim says, it's over. And Eric asks, well, why? Who's responsible? And Tim's answer is PETA. So that was really cool. And it goes to show the impact that we've had on this industry largely through these lawsuits.
Yeah, I noticed that also, that Tim Stark delivered some of the best lines and of both vitriol and praise toward PETA, and you were there representing PETA, and I applaud you for your role in this. But let's go back to the other personalities. One last word on Joe Exotic. He may be in there a long time, even though he's trying to get out. But it looks like he's enjoying his life there in the sense that he can, I guess you could use dating sites from jail, because he's getting proposals, or he's looking for another partner, and then he's got a new book. Simon and Schuster is publishing a Joe Exotic book within days now. Aren't there laws against people benefiting from from behind bars, especially, or does it not count for animal abuse charges?
Well, you can't profit from your crimes. So I guess the question is, what's covered in the book, and we don't know yet. And where's the money going? Where's the profit from the book going? So I don't think we have the answers to those questions yet. But Joe is a narcissist, and he's always been something of a charismatic leader. He's a con man and is able to con people wherever he goes. And it seems like that has extended to prison, but thankfully, there he's not able to exploit and abuse animals.
One last thing on the book. So if he does benefit from his animal abuse crimes, then that would be an issue that PETA would look into.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so all right, now let's look at another personality, Carol and Howard Baskin. They play a role here. They're sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, they are the good guys, I guess. Where are they now? And are they, what are they doing to help animals now at this point?
Well, Howard and Carol are, they didn't want to have any part of Tiger King season 2, which is completely understandable given how Carol was treated in the first series and the horrific abuse that she received after the first series came out. Unfortunately, there are 2 full episodes devoted to the whereabouts of Carol's ex-husband. But in the meantime, Carol is continuing to be strong and to fight for animals. She has a new show out herself on the Discovery Plus network called Carol Baskin's Cage Fight, where she's doing what she's done so well all along, which is advocating for big cats. Despite all of the vitriol and threats that have come her way, her focus continues to be on the cats.
So a happy ending for her so far, I guess. And you see Howard Baskin sort of like ripping the insignia or the logo off a fence in there, and he sings.
Since the last season came out, the $1 million judgment that Carol won against Joe carried over into a suit against a corporation that Jeff Lowe was part owner of that owned the zoo land, and that all came back to the fact that Joe had illegally evaded that judgment. And so what happened was that Carol was basically able to take over that entire zoo property. And so the Lowes moved most of their animals to a new property that they called Tiger King Park in Thackerville, Oklahoma. But they weren't able to move all of the animals. And so Carol and Howard made sure that all of those animals were safely transported to the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Colorado. And I want to point out to the listeners, anyone who has seen the video of Tim Stark tormenting a bear cub on PETA's website or social media, that bear, whose name is Gizzy, was one of those animals who was left behind at Tiger King Park and has now been rescued. So that was a really wonderful thing. And so now Joe Exotic's former zoo isn't just not a zoo now, but thanks to the conditions of the sale, it can never, ever be a zoo again.
Great. All right. So that's Carol and Howard Baskin and the property in Thackerville, right? Thackerville.
That was the Wynnewood property.
The Wynnewood, yeah.
Oklahoma.
All right. So now let's move on to Jeff and Lauren Lowe. They seem to be recanting their story to try to be in cahoots to help Joe Exotic. Jeff and Lauren Lowe, Jeff Lowe owes PETA a lot of money based on a judgment that PETA won. And one thing that gets me is how misogynistic and how it's just really unseemly everything is. Everything about Jeff Lowe is. But tell me, what's the update about Jeff Lowe?
Sure. So it has not been a good year for Jeff and Lauren Lowe. Again, since the last season aired, Jeff Lowe became a defendant in PETA's ESA lawsuit against Tim Stark, and that was because of Tim Stark's illegal transfer of animals to his then business partner, Jeff Lowe. It involved specifically 4 lion cubs who Stark transferred to Lowe, and because of our win in the lawsuit against Tim Stark, we were able to transfer those cubs to the Wild Animal Sanctuary as well. Unfortunately, one of those cubs, Kahari, died under suspicious circumstances at Jeff Lowe's zoo before she was able to be rescued. But the 3 surviving lions, Nala, Leo, and Amelia, were all transferred to the Wild Animal Sanctuary. PETA will soon have an update video posted about them. But it was really horrific. Over the past year, we reported to the press and the USDA horrific animal abuse going on at Jeff Lowe's facilities. There are disgusting images of Nala the lion lying lethargic in the mud with flies coating her ears, which were completely stripped bare of fur, a condition called fly strike, in which flies bite at vulnerable areas of the body, especially ears, lay their eggs there, and essentially the ears get eaten away by these biting flies and maggots. Nala, one day when the USDA showed up to visit, was non-responsive, lying in the mud, and it's the first time that we've ever seen the USDA actually halt an inspection and order an inspector to immediately provide veterinary care to an animal. Well, when we arrived to pick up Nala in September of 2020, she was so lame that she could barely walk. She would take 1 or 2 steps and simply fall over. What we found out after the Wild Animal Sanctuary took her to Colorado State University is that she had several fractures. She was a young lion, not even a year old, and it was because she had severe nutritional deficiencies. The Lowes couldn't even be bothered to provide her with a nutritious diet, let alone veterinary care. And her prognosis on that first visit was poor to fair. It was likely that she would die. But thanks to the amazing work of the Wild Animal Sanctuary and their veterinarians, today she is a boisterous young lioness who is living with Amelia and Leo, along with Indy and Heat Bomb, both of whom were rescued from Tim Stark. I just saw them a few weeks ago, and she's doing great. She's a very precocious young lion.
Yeah, one of the things about you see Tiger King 2, and you wonder, oh, what about the animals? What's the disposition of the animals? And according to reports, to date, there have been 350 animals rescued from all the stars of Tiger King, I guess season 1 and 2. But there are some positive stories coming out from the rescues, and you just name some. But I guess there are also some negative ones too, right?
Well, most of the stories have been really positive. The vast majority of animals who've been confiscated from these facilities have gone to accredited sanctuaries, including the Wild Animal Sanctuary, Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge, and other great sanctuaries. So by and large, it's a very, very happy story. And it's even happier because we know that we're putting a stop. We're finally slowing down this tiger, big cat crisis, overpopulation crisis in the United States, because we're cutting off the incentive to continue breeding them, which is the big cat cub petting industry. Yeah. If you don't need new cubs every 3 or 4 months so that you can line your pockets with encounters, then there's no reason to breed them. And we've already put the major breeders out of business. So it's a really huge success story. And And a lot of that story is told in the second season of Tiger King.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of coverage specifically about PETA's lawsuits. They're mentioned in passing. But we're going to be putting a lot more information about all of that up on PETA.org so people can learn more. They can learn about the different characters, including Zuzana Kukol, who's the woman who famously refers to herself as the Eastern European bitch in the trailer. She is no friend to animals herself. So there's lots of supplemental information for people up on PETA.org.
Well, you mentioned some things about the Endangered Species Act and how PETA looked at that act and that the way you looked at it enabled law enforcement to take action. It enabled you to file the suits, and that enabled law enforcement to take action. But what would you say is the one thing that was different or that was innovative in the approach to animal rights law that you think will be precedent setting from here on in terms of the enforcement of these laws like the Endangered Species Act?
I think it's just the creativity that we put into it. And we looked at this law and we were trying to figure out a way to sue to end the big cat cub petting industry. And, would it have been enough just to say that the cub petting encounters themselves violated the ESA? Maybe not. But there is a lot of evidence about the trauma of the premature maternal separation. So I think, I think that was something that was groundbreaking. And then also the fact that we're building on the law every time we file a new case. So our first case against Dade City's Wild Things was about tigers, and it was about premature maternal separation and encounters. And then our second suit was against. And the second suit related to not just tigers, but lions and tiger-lion hybrids. And it also covered decline. And so every time we sue, we're expanding the law. And we have another idea for our next cub petting lawsuit, if we need to bring one, that will expand the law even further, and that will go even beyond the big cat cub petting industry. So we're really excited. We're continuing to innovate. And now that the big cat cub petting industry is almost decimated, we're moving on to other issues that are really important to captive wildlife, because we want to concentrate on eliminating the worst abuses for captive wildlife. So we're looking at things like solitary confinement of highly social animals and psychological injuries, which is something that we've already gotten at in the cub petting context. So we have a lot of great ideas that we're working up now. And we also need to pay a lot of attention to ending other types of cub petting. Some of these exhibitors who used to do big cat cub petting have turned now to bear cub petting, or sloth petting, or lemur encounters. And so that's something that we need to put a stop to as well, because it's just as cruel.
The sloths, they're going after the sloths. The sloths have already given up and said, no. And they're going after the sloths now. Sloth encounters
are big business. Are big business now.
Wow. One thing that did come across to me when I was watching through season 2, they do talk about the harms of declawing, and that is well explained. If people don't understand what they're taking off, they're not just taking off a claw; they're taking off an appendage, or taking off a part of the finger, and it's very graphic. And if people don't understand that, when they see Tiger King 2, they'll see, oh, that's what Brittany's talking about when she's talking about declawing.
Yep. Yeah, and the way that was illustrated in Tiger King season 2 was really, really fantastic. And I think all of this raises so many questions about, what are the regulations about this stuff in the United States? Because the U.S. Department of Agriculture should be taking all of these guys down themselves.
Yeah, that's Brittany's dog, by the way, not me.
Yes, that's Leonard. that's Leonard.
He's not been declawed, though.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture has been complicit in this industry for, honey, come here, in this industry for years. And it's time for them to step up. They need to step up and end all cub petting, all encounters with wildlife. Until they do, one of the most important things for everyone to do now is to call your federal legislators and make sure that they're supporting the Big Cat Public Safety Act. That legislation would ban the private ownership of big cats, and it would critically end public contact with big cats, which would include the cub petting industry. So it would not just be something where there's an ESA precedent where you could pursue civil litigation. It would actually be a crime.
Yeah. Before I let you go, let's talk a little about Tim Stark. We talked about Jeff Lowe, and I don't want to give short shrift to Tim Stark because he seems to be a key figure. But one thing about, we know Joe Exotic's behind bars. We know that Jeff Lowe, he's still out there. He's still out free somewhere. No one's pursuing him, right? And I guess the same is true with Tim Stark. He's out there free as well.
Right. Neither of them are currently facing any criminal charges relating to their animal abuse.
Yeah. But they're not engaged in the animal or the petting zoo business, as far as we know.
No, neither one of them are. Tim Stark at this point, thanks to PETA's lawsuit, he can never again own ESA protected big cats without court approval, which he would be unlikely to get. And because of the state of Indiana's lawsuit against him, he can never own any mammals or native wildlife native to the state of Indiana. So basically all animals. And Jeff Lowe, because of a lawsuit from the USDA, is permanently prohibited from engaging in the exhibition of animals, and all of his animals, wild and exotic animals, were confiscated by federal authorities.
But he's still participating in trying to lessen or change or get a new trial for Joe Exotic, I guess.
Yes, he is. I mean, I think that's Jeff Lowe will do anything that benefits Jeff Lowe. And right now, the thing that is keeping him relevant is getting back on Team Joe, as they say.
So I think we've covered most of the key players. Tim Stark I mentioned because I wanted to mention again because you had said he was the one who most directly, pointed to PETA as the reason why his industry has pretty much gone away.
Right. Yeah. Tim Stark made that admission in Tiger King season 2, and Jeff Lowe also had a quote in Tiger King season 2 saying that he believed that the beginning of Tim Stark's downfall was PETA's lawsuit. And
so now it's still not over, though, as you said. There's still a way that people who watch these things, I mean, I don't know if I would have watched this if I didn't know there was a PETA connection, but I guess there's people who are enthralled by this whole real true crime saga, I guess. I mean, is that right? The reason why people are kind of obsessed with Tiger King and Joe Exotic?
There's a train wreck phenomenon to it. And I think people are enthralled by the just crazy personalities. And what we saw after Tiger King season 1, and hopefully this will be the case with the second season as well, is that after people got over just the sheer shock of realizing that people like this exist in the first place and that this type of animal abuse is going on in the United States, and that federal authorities, at least at that time, were allowing it to occur, they really did start thinking about the animals. And so after the first season of Tiger King, the Big Cat Public Safety Act, actually, it's been being tossed around in Congress for years now, but for the first time it passed in the House. At the time, Mitch McConnell was in control of the Senate, and there was no way he was going to bring it up for a vote. So it didn't go anywhere there. But it's been reintroduced again in both chambers. And this is the best chance that there's ever been that it could actually pass and go to President Biden's desk, where we expect that it would be signed. So another one of the really great impacts of the first season of Tiger King is that the notoriety that it gave these abusers meant that anytime we had a piece of dirt on any of them, we could do a press release and get international headlines. And so we were able to get international headlines of those images of poor Nala with the ears, the flies carpeting her ears. And I think that had a huge impact on the government's decision to sue Jeff Lowe. It's the first time that we've ever seen the U.S. Department of Justice go after an animal exhibitor like this. It's unprecedented. And I think that it came as a result of, obviously, not only the precedent that PETA set in the Tim Stark case, but also the huge media coverage that we were putting out there of the abuse that was going on at Lowe's facility.
Yeah, so as crazy as the whole Joe Exotic thing has been, it's a net plus for animal rights, a net plus for the animals.
Absolutely.
Brittany, Peet, thank you again. Congratulations on your role in bringing these animal abusers to justice. And I just want people to know when, they might get a little sympathetic toward Joe Exotic and the whole murder for hire thing when they see this, but they need to remember he's an animal abuser. He deserves to be in jail for what he did to the animals.
That's absolutely right. Joe is just as bad, if not worse, than Tim Stark and Jeff Lowe in terms of his animal abuse. He was the architect of the big cat cub petting industry, and he stole hundreds, if not thousands, of baby big cat cubs from their mothers and sold them to monsters like Tim Stark, who he knew were going to mutilate them with declawing surgeries. And he is not a sympathetic character in the least, and he's exactly where he belongs.
But don't you find it interesting that Jeff Lowe and Tim Stark almost have they say, oh, Joe's been away for too long already. They have this soft spot in their heart for. Is that just an act, do you think? Or do you think they really believe that, God, Joe took the fall for us? Jeff Lowe.
These are all con men and liars. You can never believe anything that they say. They will say anything that they can for sympathy or attention. And none of that. I mean, they both have thrown Joe under the bus. So I don't think they have too much sympathy for him in reality.
All right, Brittany, thank you very much again.
All right. Thank you so much.
And appreciate your time. And I'm glad that your dog's name again is
Leonard.
Leonard, thank you, Leonard, for your patience.
Oh, bless him. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Emil.
Brittany Peet, PETA's kale department, she's the head for the Captured Animal Legal Enforcement Division. She filed the lawsuits that is really driving the Tiger King. She talked about the animals and how the animals are now in sanctuaries doing a whole lot better than Joe Exotic, and how even some of Joe Exotic's cohorts are admitting that the exotic animal industry just isn't what it used to be, thanks in large part to the lawsuits filed by Peet and PETA. See more, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at amok.com, amok.com, or see my work at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, that's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. You can even subscribe to the show. Remember, it helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.